Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? I see that there are a bunch of people that are here, and I hope everybody is safe and sound. And we know that there's some weather out there, so we appreciate everybody being here. We know you got nowhere to go if the weather's bad, so thank you all for joining us. Let's dive in. Again, just for those that weren't on, my name is Michael Blue. I'm a principal consultant at Tesca Associates. We're the lead consulting firm that's working on the comprehensive plan, helping the village prepare a vision and a plan for its future. I'm joined from Tesca by Francie Lawrence, who was instrumental in putting all this together. So before we even think of starting, mine and our collective thanks to Francie for making this happen today. So let's talk a little bit about what we're up to. You see on the screen that when this is Wilmette Talk number 4. This is part of the public engagement aspect of the comprehensive plan for the village. And tonight's topics are transportation and sustainability. This is the 4th and final talk of the comprehensive plan. For those of you that are interested in learning more about the comprehensive plan, I'm not going to go into my long explanation of comprehensive plans, but we'll invite you to visit the comprehensive plan website. The website is called readysetwilmette.com. It has tons of background about what we're up to, what the plan is, and how the village has put all this together and is proceeding with this. There's a lot to be excited about. There's a lot of great work that's gone on. And I can tell you as the consultant, we've really enjoyed working with the village and the folks that we've been working with. So we recommend the plan to you. We'll introduce our panelists in just a second, but we'll let you know that on our agenda here, we have 2 parts. We'll talk about the transportation aspects that are going on in the village. And then we're going to talk about sustainability, primarily environmental sustainability. These are 2 interesting topics because the village has current plans for these. The comprehensive planning process is not looking to redo them or change them or refine them, but to figure out how they can be incorporated into the overall long-term vision that the village is putting together. So this is a very different talk than the others that we've had, which, by the way, you can find at Ready, Set, Wilmette. And so we're looking forward to hearing from the panelists that we have. You can see on the screen that there's a Q&A. We will have Q&A at the end of some general panel discussion questions that we have, and invite you all to share. I'll apologize now. I can't be sure that we're going to get to everybody's questions, but we will do the best that we can to have a lively chat and a chance to share what we've learned with everybody. For those of you that want to let people know that they missed a really wonderful webinar, this one will be, we're recording, and it'll be on the website as soon as we're done. So with that, let's dive in and go to our transportation panel and talk about what we're up to. The bios of all of these good people are also on the website, and I invite you to go take a deeper look at who they are and their experience. But I would take a minute to introduce you to Jill Hayes, who is on the Village's Transportation Commission. Dan Manis is the village engineer, so he works for the village. Tim Perry is with Bike Walk Wilmette and plenty more. And then 2 members of our consulting team are going to join us for both of these discussions. Cindy Fish with Fish Transportation Group, who is focusing on the active transportation elements. And Brett Emmons of EOR, who focuses on sustainability and a lot that has to do with water. And both Brett and Cindy are going to join us for both panels. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a little bit of background so you have a sense of what we're talking about. We're going to ask Dan to talk to us a little bit about the active transportation plan that, as I mentioned, the village has recently adopted. And then we're going to ask Cindy to talk a little bit about what are kind of the big cutting edge issues and ideas for transportation nationally, and I guess around the world. So with that, Dan, maybe you could take us on a tour of the plan.
Thank you, Michael. As Michael mentioned, my name is Dan Manis, village engineer. I'm here tonight to discuss Wilmette's Master Bike and Active Transportation Plan. I was involved in the development of the plan. It was nearly a 3-year process from start to finish, and I will be providing a brief overview. So here we are. What is Bike and Active Transportation Plan? Wilmette's plan was a community-wide plan. It was a planning level document that was intended to provide the village staff guidance on how to implement village policies and programs as they relate to active transportation related to the pedestrian environment and making bicycling more comfortable within the village. It wasn't providing us design details for specific projects. There's this document is, a planning level document, and each project will be looked at in more detail as they come forward in implementation phase of the project. Next slide. So there was a lot of time spent by the Transportation Commission on making this vision statement right. They felt it was important to accurately convey the intent of the plan, and which helps guide, I guess, the overarching principles of the Master Bike and Active Transportation Plan. The Transportation Commission looked at the plan over the course of a couple meetings, and they felt like this vision statement accomplished that goal. Next slide. So as I mentioned, there was a long process, and it was a culmination of a robust public engagement process to develop and refine the contents of this plan. It started with a Master Bike and Active Transportation Plan Advisory Group made up of village residents and volunteers, which refined the scope of services for development of the plan. The village engaged a consulting engineer in April of 2018 to start the planning process. And there was, as I mentioned, a public engagement that involved many outreach opportunities of open houses, attending like Summerfest, and there were focus groups and stakeholder meetings with the various groups in the village. So it resulted in what you see in front of you, a wide array of contents within the plan. Next slide. What gets a lot of focus within the plan are the network recommendations. So these are physical improvements throughout the village. And this map primarily displays bicycle accommodations within village right-of-way. And there's a variety of different facility types listed that were chosen based on the characteristics of each of these roadways. Next slide. One of the common facility types is a bike boulevard. This is most appropriate for local streets or neighborhood streets with low speeds, low volumes that don't require as much impact to the existing roadway. And can you go to the next slide? And then on the other end of the spectrum are roadways where the planning process didn't select a specific facility type, and these were corridors where maybe the right-of-way was underutilized, and so there was an opportunity to consider various options for the specific bicycle accommodation, whether it's a side path, bike lane, or another type of bicycle accommodation. Next slide. And then there are other areas within the village where there's conceptual plans to overcome some of what were the most significant barriers to comfortable biking and walking in the village. And one of them was the Edens Expressway, and there are several proposed crossing improvements, and this is a depiction of one of them where there's a consideration for either an underpass or an overpass of the Edens Expressway. That'd be a dedicated pedestrian and bike shared use path. Next slide. So with the development of the plan and approval by the village board in February 2021, we have this document that was finished. It had been vetted through the various boards and commissions and by the public, but our work doesn't stop there. We have to continue to use this document to implement some of the recommendations in the document. So that's kind of where we are in the process right now, is that we have recently developed a 5-year implementation plan that was presented to the Transportation Commission earlier this year. And if you want to go to the next slide, this document is intended to be a living document, not a stagnant document. It's going to be reviewed on an annual basis by the Transportation Commission. And there's the goal of presenting the Transportation Commission an updated 5-year implementation plan every year. And then the implementation plan would be considered by our village board as part of our capital improvement project or program in the 3rd quarter of each year. And then we would be ready to implement plan recommendations in the following year. So that process began this year. We presented our first 5-year implementation plan, and our village board is actually meeting tonight to consider the capital improvement program. Like I said, we don't want this document collecting dust on the shelf. We are planning to revisit it every year and have the talented folks on our Transportation Commission review and update the document as needed. Next slide. So with that, are there any questions about the master bike and active transportation plan that we can entertain now, or do we move forward?
I'll tell you what, that's a great point, Dan. If anybody's got questions about the plan, why don't you put them into the Q&A that's part of the webinar, and we'll keep going and see if we have a chance to answer those questions later. I know Dan's on a tight schedule, and I want to thank him here for fitting this event in. But if you've got questions about the plan, why don't you put them into the Q&A, and we'll look at getting to them. But for now, let's move on and ask Cindy to talk to us a little bit about the innovative approaches and best practices.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Michael. Hey, thanks, Dan. Yeah, so before we kind of really get into the panel discussion, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time just highlighting some examples from other communities, not to, to inundate people with like details or a lot of data, but just to kind of get us thinking kind of outside the lane a little bit. So, yeah, some of the things that looking at some examples for like a street reallocation, bike share program, autonomous shuttle, curb management, and also looking at a couple of best practices. So if we go, there we go. So this is a street reallocation policy from Vancouver, and the Vancouver City Council directed their staff to reallocate 11% of roadway space that's in support of their climate action plan and their comprehensive plan called Moving Forward. And so reallocating roadway space means reducing or narrowing travel or parking lanes and allocate that space to bikes and pedestrians and or transit users. It improves safety, comfort for pedestrians, for cyclists, for public transit users. And it can range, there can be different strategies. It can range from just kind of pedestrian priority streets that might be kind of like some of the shared streets that we saw during COVID, or where vehicle traffic might be banned or eliminated during certain times or certain seasons. Or it can be part of a complete streets program where vehicles can be permitted, but yet the improvements clearly prioritize and the space dedicated clearly prioritize people walking, biking, riding transit. But it really it tries to provide that incentive to shift people from driving to to taking those sustainable modes. So this is one of the cities that really has stepped up and said we want to reallocate 11% of our roadway. So if in the next slide, they took kind of more of the an analytical approach to it, and they looked at how street space is currently being allocated for travel, and then looked at how residents actually do travel. So it's they set a target for having 2/3 of all of their trips to be made by active transportation or transit. So they've set up a way to analyze it and to monitor progress towards meeting their goals. And looking at how residents travel, it's important to look at not just the work trips, which is what we tend to look at in this area, but we know that work trips have changed a lot over the last couple of years. It's really important to understand, the full range of travel, the full modes of going to school or running errands or those types of things. So, but having an analytical basis helps to support those recommendations. Okay, we can go to the next one. So this is a bike share program. Portland, Maine established their own bike share program. Their goal was to include 200 bikes and 50 e-bikes at the start. This slide just shows they generate a number of local sponsors. This is the proposed stations. They're using a company called Tandem Mobility. So they set up a program on their own. Now, locally, there are communities here in the Chicago area that have set up their own bike programs. I think Evanston is part of Divvy. Naperville uses an electric bike rental program called Pedigo. And then several of the Fox Valley communities like Aurora established a kind of a joint community program. It's called Colonia, I think, but they didn't want just their community to have, they didn't want to deal with like the boundaries that they couldn't go to the next community over. So they set up a program that includes, I think, 3 or 4 communities. So, but, moving, using a Divvy program, just expanding that is also an option.
Okay.
Next is, so this is actually an electric autonomous vehicle. It's a pilot program. Is in White Bear Lake, Minnesota. And actually some of the examples of communities that I picked, I tried to pick those that were either northern or really had like weather to deal with, so that it wasn't Florida or, or someplace that was not going to be the same as us. So, so in White Bear Lake, they piloted a shuttle to increase options. This was actually for those that included had mobility issues or transportation challenges. And we're just looking for innovative ways to provide transportation in the community. You can see they started out with this one route that went from a YMCA to some other type of center. But, it's a way that, it's an option that you can look at that maybe connects schools or major employment centers, connects them to the downtown, can connect them to transit stations. There's some other pilots in Portland, Maine, and also I think in Denver, but just kind of thinking in Wilmette, maybe thinking of connecting from the other side of the Edens or connecting over to the Linden CTA station, but something to kind of think about. So this addresses that all important curb use management. Everybody likes to have their parking. In Seattle, and there's been several cities that have established these curb use management programs, but in Seattle, they really look at curb space as it's not just parking, but it's a flex space that's allocated to the adjacent land uses, and the use of that curb space is based upon what those land uses are. Their overall curb space management program includes design standards, implementation policies, education, communications, and enforcement, and includes things like special signage, curb color coding, different sidewalk widths, bus loading. You could also have smart parking meters that can manage, parking use by time of day or day of week. So, but there are some really innovative ways that communities are looking at how they manage their curb space. And so then last is just a couple of kind of best practices. This one is, it's called the protected intersections. And protected intersection, I think most people might be familiar with curb bump outs or maybe, expanded crosswalks. A protected intersection really brings a whole suite of improvements that are focused on protecting bicycle and pedestrians, separating them from vehicular travel to provide greater visibility, safety, and comfort. So, and it wouldn't be just putting in one bump out or a pedestrian refuge. But like I said, it's really kind of a whole suite of the whole package. So, but it could include a variety of different things, such as corner islands that protect bikes from turning vehicles, the forward bike stop bars that I think a lot of people might be familiar more with the term, the bike boxes, curb extensions, pedestrian refuge, enhanced crosswalks and accessibility features, and signal timings that prioritize bikes and pedestrians. And then last is just, it's an example of just an enhanced crosswalk design that really increases the visibility of pedestrian and bicyclists by using signage. This is this bright color blue paint. This picture actually has a protected bike lane, but really you can just use different design and streetscape techniques to help increase the visibility and the safety for pedestrians and bicyclists.
Great. So thanks, Cindy. And Dan for giving us that kickoff. So let's dive in with our transportation panel and go through some of our questions. I see there's already questions popping up in the Q&A. We'll do our best to get to those as well. And I would just say too, one of the questions was about where can you see the transportation plan or the active transportation plan that Dan was describing, and you can find that on the village's website. So, but let's start for our transportation panel. Maybe somebody wants to kick us off and talk about what the greatest transportation and mobility challenges are right now in Wilmette. I didn't think y'all be shy. Dan, maybe you can share something that came out of the plan that jumped out as the greatest issue.
Yeah, there's as part of the engagement, there was a question about barriers to biking and walking in Wilmette. And what kind of stood out was the Edens Expressway, the Metro tracks, and certain intersections that were busy that didn't have high-level pedestrian treatments were primarily stood out.
Okay. Tim, how about from the bicyclist perspective?
Well, I think it all, for Wilmette or any community, it comes down to safety. So we've learned from working on this that there are different ways to separate bike and vehicular traffic, and that's the most important aspect, I think, for making people feel like they can ride around safely, whether it's striping on streets or moving up to bollards and things like that. Ultimately, you have to at some point consider protected bike lanes like Cindy just showed on Howard Street. And that's something that's hard to implement because it affects all the car traffic, it affects everybody. So it's a goal that you have to keep in mind. And I think Wilmette has done a good job over the last few years with the bike plan and the implementation plan and complete streets. They're working towards it, but we just have to stay on top of it.
You know, Tim, you mentioned something that now one of the couple of the questions that have come in, I jumped to that. Wilmette's doing a lot. What kind of coordination is going on with other communities or adjacent towns to coordinate? Yeah, maybe you're involved in that on a regular basis.
Well, our group Bike Walk Wilmette does that. I mean, we work with an Evanston group, and
excellent.
And the whole idea of this is connectivity to move up and down the North Shore and eventually west to Glenview and beyond. So there are groups out there that are doing stuff similar to what we're doing with the Village of Wilmette.
Our planning consultants did reach out to the area communities or our adjacent bordering communities and determined what their bike routes were to make sure we were proposing good connections to our neighbors, because it was all about making traveling to destinations in the village or outside the village more comfortable for walkers and bikers.
Interesting. Great. So let's ask another question about what the village can do to become a leader in these kind of sustainable practices that we've been talking about in creating a mobility network that prioritizes sustainable transportation, reduces auto dependency, and what can the village do? And maybe it could also get you to opine on whether or not it's important for the village to be a leader. Jill, maybe we get you to kick that one off.
Good. Yeah, this one really, I have a lot of ideas related to this, and some of which I know are already being talked about and thought about in the the active transportation plan. Some are a little more long-term out. I think that, one big thing you can do, which it sounds like you being a leader in this, but installing bike racks. It's one of those things that's so small, but so many communities don't have it, and it becomes a challenge to bicycling because people can't go somewhere because there's nowhere to put their bike and they don't want to leave it unattended and not locked up. And so it's just the littlest thing. But I think if Wilmette focused on a network of sufficient, maybe coupling that with a bike share, I think that's a great way to be a leader. I think that a lot of the surrounding communities are doing that. I think that's something that could be very suitable for Wilmette, a bike share or even scooters. I think there's a desire to move around the village without a car, but removing some of those barriers is giving some of those other opportunities and removing them in a way that accommodates all ages and abilities. I have 3 kids, they're 5, 7, and 9. We can't bike everywhere for them because my 5-year-old can barely get off her training wheels. So, I think keeping that in mind where you can make it family friendly, but also, have options for different types of people with different capabilities is going to be important. So bike shares and bike racks, I think, are great. Looking forward to the future of vehicles because they don't know that they're going away. Also looking at what is kind of our future plan network for charging stations for electric vehicles, I think would be important to think about from a holistic perspective. And then where we can, I think implementing pockets of shared, mixed land use to create accessible and walkable communities. One of the things that I know we loved about Wilmette when we moved up here was I can walk to a coffee shop. A lot of people come to Wilmette leaving the city, loving the walkability of the city. And so I know we have large residential pockets, but trying to put in, amenities and mix the use of the land as much as possible to allow people opportunities to walk to an ice cream shop or gather in a community park or something like that. I think really keeping a focus on that, creating space and community in feasible walking pockets will help us be a leader in the future.
Well, I think that's a great point. It's not just about doing something big. It's not just about building a bridge over the Edens, but there's a lot of little things that can be done. And you make an excellent point. We did a plan we're working in another community that had a downtown a lot like Wilmette and wanted to know, we asked a focus group, well, why don't people ride their bikes? And they said exactly what you did. There's no bike racks downtown. There's nowhere to put my bike. So that's a great point. Sometimes it's about the little things. Anybody else want to share a take on that one? It's a fun question.
I'd just like to say that we have done something on bike racks in the last couple of years. The Rotary Club did a nice program with Bike Walk Wilmette that's added racks around Village Hall, down at the beach, and at other specified areas around the village. We always need more. I mean, when you look at the bike racks at the metro station, as soon as we come out of the pandemic, those racks were full every day. You couldn't park a bike at those racks. So we do need more parking spaces, and Jill had a great point on that.
Sure. And Cindy, you mentioned some of the examples that are there. Maybe we could get you or Brett to say a little bit about what you see out there in terms of the communities that are considered leaders. What kind of things along the lines of what Jill and Tim have mentioned do you see leaders doing?
Well, so just picking up with what Jill had to say, I mean, there are one thing that I recommend in communities, and I do a lot of work in communities similar to Wilmette with metro stations or really vibrant downtowns, is that bike infrastructure. And it's not just, making, bike stations with covered parking or secure parking or bike repair tools, so just making it, really accessible for those that are riding bikes. And I would say that just adding, Jill also talked about the electric vehicle infrastructure. just charging stations and allowing, looking at kind of e-cargo bikes and, those types of things that would require some charging stations. So, and that all relates to, the compact development and accessible modes, green infrastructure, and then just maintenance, some of the small things, cleaning the sidewalks, clearing the sidewalks in the wintertime, just making it easy for people to get around all year round.
Yeah. Brett, you were going to say?
I think Cindy took a couple of my main points was, looking at more covered. I mean, we're here in Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul. I mean, having covered bike racks or bike lockers is a big one, I think, in terms of being able to deal with the weather. And then, even keeping all your bike lanes open in the wintertime. I don't know if you do that or if that seems like an odd thing, but I'm seeing, there's a lot more. I have a niece that lives in Minneapolis. She does ride, almost every day of the year, and except for 30 below, we'll be out there. And there's a core group of people that will use the bikes, even with little studs on their tires, for the winter time. So doing things like that. And the bike share is we have a pretty good program here. I was just talking to a staff member that comes from a different part of the world and saying how, the bike shares that are picking up, like I've used ours here in Minneapolis, it's also not cheap, and there are, if that can be assisted so that it becomes, I went to downtown Minneapolis, was $4 or $5 to go one way and $6 to get back to the baseball stadium. We were going to watch a game as our company. So, I mean, compared to just doing a couple dollars per ride, I think, that becomes a little bit of a barrier too. If it's, spending $15 just to get on a couple short trips versus something that can be supported publicly, that becomes more accessible. This other staff person was giving the example where, it's so inexpensive. A lot of people don't even have bikes because they would just like to use the bike share because it's handy and it's not very expensive. So those are some ideas.
Our next question ties into some of the ones that have found their way into the chat. And Dan, maybe I'll get you to kick us off. The question we had was about what types of infrastructure could be reimagined or reallocated to make a safer, more connected network, and where might this happen? One of the things that's a challenge about doing all this in Wilmette is it's a built-up community. And one of the points that was brought up in the chat is that more bike racks at Eden's Plaza would be great, but you can't necessarily get there. And Dan, I would pile on too. One of the other questions that we'd ask you to answer is, somebody said, when are we going to start to see some of these improvements? Right? You were talking about the 5-year plan. Maybe this is a chance for you to talk a little bit about what's coming when. So was that a complicated enough multi-level question for you? Just pick which part you want to answer.
I guess going back to, a previous answer, what are some of the barriers in Wilmette? One of them is our east-west travel. It is difficult to get east-west through Wilmette, and that can make it uncomfortable for residents or our roadway users to get to Eden's Plaza. But that's something that we have in mind. We are scheduled to construct a shared use path on Skokie Boulevard. It's grant funded north of Lake Avenue. Is going to provide a connection of the Sprucewood neighborhood to Eden's Plaza. This is just one piece of many segments that we're looking at. We're scheduled next year to construct improvements of the intersection of the Skokie and Lake intersection that should make that intersection safer for the pedestrians to use. That will help make accessing Eden's Plaza more comfortable. We are constructing a shared use bike path on Greenleaf this year. That's going to be happening next month. That's our first project out the gates of the implementation plan, first construction project. We're underway with several studies. We're going to be studying Glenview and Wilmette Road west of Ridge, see how that we can implement or what bike accommodation works best on that road. And that's a major east-west route that would help make traveling east and west in the village easier. We're also studying Ridge Road. This is another major road that would provide a north-south connection to some of those east-west routes. And both those are IDOT. They're not under the jurisdiction of the village, so that's why we're starting with feasibility studies with those. And then we also have some design projects that will be implemented next year. Some bike boulevards on some neighborhood streets that are paired with other planned village infrastructure projects. So there were a lot of considerations when developing the implementation plan, and one of them, a strong consideration was what are other planned projects within the village, so we can couple, the bike and ped improvements with infrastructure projects that are already planned.
Mhm. You make a great point too, is that not all of the roads that are in Wilmette are Wilmette roads and under the village's jurisdiction. So it's not like you have control over every road to do these things.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else want to share a perspective on the question?
Well, I think what Dan was referring to, which is just great, is the implementation plan is like a roadmap. When you look at that, it tells when a design is set to be done, when costing is going to be done. It gives you an idea of when each of these projects might be ready for implementation, all the way up to the Greenleaf project that he just mentioned. That's the first one out of the box. When we went to the Transportation Commission last year to talk about this plan, we were told what time that would happen and when it's going to go, and now it's actually going to happen. And then we'll move on to the next project and just keep moving them down the base paths.
Excellent, thank you. So one of the questions that I always like to ask a panel like this is, if you can make one of these changes, and Dan listed a great list of stuff that's in the works now, but group, if you could do just one thing, what would it be? Jill, got a dream project you want to tell us about?
I can chime in on this one. Yeah, I would love to see a complete, dedicated, comfortable east-west bikeway connecting the entire village from the lake all the way to the western border. Yeah, I would love to see it as its own dedicated facility with, complete with grade separation at the Metra crossing as well as the Edens. I think that would be phenomenal, because you could really just, because the village is so long and narrow, you could really just get on that and connect to so many destinations so easily. I know that is really integrated into the bike walk, into the active transportation plan, but it utilizes a lot of the existing infrastructure. If I could wipe the slate clean, I think we could do a really cool version of that. But I think that really was one of the challenges that I think the biggest challenges that we heard on the Transportation Commission was that challenge to east-west mobility for the village. And I think that really completing that system, whether that be through the segments identified in the plan, which I think will create that system, but then really making it robust through dedicated facilities or off-street or path type of facilities, and then signing and branding it in a way that you don't have to worry about your 10-year-old making a wrong turn and getting off course. Right now I don't let my 10-year-old go that far, because they're like, well, what if he doesn't know? So making striping it, painting it a certain color, and having all that, so it's like you really really make that a bikeway through. I think that would be a phenomenal project that would really transform and allow, kind of take away the barrier for a lot of people who aren't currently bicycling as much as they could. And that's my grand plan if I were king for a day or queen for a day.
Okay, excellent. Anybody else got a magic wand that they want to change something with?
Well, I agree with Jill on that project, and I think that project can be closer than people think. I mean, when earlier on, when Dan showed parts of the plan talking about an underpass for Edens or an overpass, that doesn't really need to be done. We've got Glenview Road crossing the Edens Expressway right now, which is very wide and comfortable. It's not a hard hill to get over. And that could be, when you're over that, you're at the Forest Preserve bike path that takes you up to Botanic Gardens. You're at the rec center for all the kids programs and everything else. And that can all hook back at least down to the library with a pretty direct route. So I think it's always going to be something that people are talking about around here. So we might as well just start moving it forward, I think.
Excellent. Hey, Dan, I have another one for you. I know you need to drop off, and we've got a village specific question I want to run by you. One of the attendees says there are parts of Wilmette that don't currently have sidewalks, and in the active transportation plan, is there a priority for sidewalks and to address those gaps?
There is a section in the active transportation plan on filling sidewalk gaps. Soon after the plan was adopted early last year, there was a modification to the village's sidewalk gap policy, which allows residents to request gaps to be filled and prioritizes them more than they had been in the past. So past village policy required a majority of the residents on that block to be in favor. Now there's other considerations. Is it filling a gap? I don't know them all off the top of my head, but like, is it a route within the village's plan? Is it a priority sidewalk location? And some other considerations that can make it easier to fill those gaps because filling those gaps can be impactful to existing landscape or infrastructure, and they can sometimes be costly. But this, part of the development of this plan did make it easier to fill those gaps, knowing that they were preventing certain neighborhoods from being more walkable.
Okay. I want to turn to some more of the questions that we've gotten here. A question about PACE and PACE having been reducing service over the past several years, and there's a whole COVID thing going on here too. But can somebody share any conversations or any understanding of what PACE is up to and what they might be up to in Wilmette, and whether or not, particularly along Wilmette Avenue, there might be potential for improving the current service there?
I'm not familiar with PACE's plans.
Okay.
I haven't had any direct conversations about Wilmette, but I know that PACE, as they started building back, from COVID, that really started focusing on those key routes, those that serve by schools, downtowns, major destinations, and they are starting to build back more. So, I think that all of the transit agencies really are trying to kind of rebrand a little bit as far as, what is the travel patterns have changed. And if the midday service, the reverse commute service, a lot of those, they really have to kind of rethink how service is being delivered. So, and I think that's what they're struggling with it right now. But I know that PACE has started bringing back more of their service, but I haven't heard anything specifics about Wilmette.
Okay. We had a question here. Actually, it came in a little bit beforehand about the potential, and again, some of the ideas that are newer here that come from technology, but the idea of alternative electric vehicles for local passengers. And maybe somebody could tell us a little bit about these low-speed electric vehicles and how they get used and how they might fit into Wilmette. I know we got this question previously, so I thank the questioner for that. And we shared it with our panel. So anybody have any experience with this or anything they'd like to share about how this idea could be incorporated into Wilmette's transportation future?
So, I did have a slide that kind of talked about, that White Bear Lake example of an electric autonomous vehicle. It's not really an active transportation as it is a sustainable transportation option. Something to look at that the city of Chicago does allow for low-speed electric vehicles that are less than 10 passengers as part of a ride-hailing program. So rather than having regular just cars, gas-fueled vehicles, they're electric cars. So it's reducing that greenhouse gas. There wasn't a pilot in the Bronzeville neighborhood, I believe, that looked at using these low-speed electric vehicles for senior transportation as kind of a low-cost option for shared ride for seniors. So there are some, I think these were only like 3 to 5 passengers. So they're small vehicles, they're fully electric. They can be used to provide circulation around like office, key employment sites, schools, but really as part of not as part of an active transportation, but certainly part of a sustainable transportation option.
Great, thanks for that. And obviously, that's what some of this is about. Is there are a whole bunch of different options and different ways to make progress here.
And I think that builds into kind of what the next panel will be, sustainability. But the charging stations, providing e-cargo bikes, kind of that whole electric vehicle type of fleet.
Sure, understood. What about technology? We talk about smart technology, we talk about technology being the answer to things, and we all hear about the big things that are out there in terms of electric vehicles and so on and so forth. But what are some of the smaller ways that the technology is helping to do this that you all have seen either in Wilmette or in other communities that you think might be part of the future for Wilmette's transportation system? Tim, what do you see in the biking world that you wish Wilmette had?
I don't know about smart technology as much as what's coming technologically speaking are e-bikes, and they're coming. They're more than 30% of bike sales already in the United States. And they're going to be all over the bike paths, all over the roads, and there's going to be a lot of issues with them because a lot of these e-bikes are very powerful. They're almost like small motorbikes. They can do up to 25 or 30 miles per hour, and there aren't a lot of restrictions on them yet. And after we see more and more of them coming on our streets and on the North Shore bike path and things like that, villages are going to have to get together and make some sort of restrictions about what kind of bike you can ride on that type of facility, because they're just going through the roof as far as sales. And you can ask any of the dealers around here; it's where all their margins are, and they're selling a ton of them. The other thing is that they're selling them because as the cycling population gets older, they want to keep riding, but they're not. They don't have the same facility that they did as younger riders, and they get on these e-bikes, and on the first pedal stroke, you're hooked. I know because I have one.
Just moved. There was a question here about going to be more protected bike lanes instead of just areas where there are painted bike signals or bike lanes or sharrows or that sort of thing. I'm wondering if anybody would like to share a perspective on trading, say, automobile travel lanes for bike lanes, or having there be less capacity for cars and more capacity for bikes. Anybody seen that where it's worked? Anybody would like to venture a comment to whether or not Wilmette should do that or not?
They did a nice job at Northwestern.
Yeah.
On Sheridan Road, right past the main part of campus, where they separated bikes from traffic, and they probably didn't go far enough, but they took it just about up to the Wilmette border. So that's been pretty popular.
Yeah, I think a couple communities, both in Canada and here in Minnesota and Minneapolis, St. Paul. I mean, there was a big question of, the ridership is not huge. Do you put all this emphasis on that and take away street? But I think the answer has borne out. Proof is in the pudding, if you will, that they have invested a lot. They have dedicated a lot more, and the bike ridership has just gone through the roof in a way. I mean, once it became that there's a lot of good, safe routes, I think, and as long as it's well thought out that, this is a place where there has potential, I think it actually has been realized that the ridership really has picked up quite a bit, and that the community didn't look like it had egg on its face for putting these infrastructure in, because it did actually get use. So that was gratifying, I guess.
I think that's something that Wilmette could do and embrace, but I think the key is you really have to do enough to reduce vehicle dependency. And I think, and make biking and or walking or some auto shuttle or alternative mode better than driving, or more accessible or as safe or cheaper than driving. And that's why I think that's something that's good that the comprehensive plan looks at, because I think it's not just about making safe bike facilities. It's about destination planning and you know, planning how people can get to you know, places, and accounting for the weather too. So, because there's sometimes where, you know, maybe people would be open to not being able to drive to downtown Wilmette in the summer because it's beautiful and you can walk and then you could utilize that space. But in the winter, they want to drive. And so I think having some flex on there, I think it really needs to be looked at with balancing the needs of all the modes of transportation. And, you know, one reason people take the metro is because it's faster than driving. And so I think you have to balance that and really focus on promoting, you know, creating facilities that make these a better option to decrease the vehicle dependency. Then you can have more one-car families. You can have less a need for parking. People hold on to parking because they need it. They have multiple cars, they have, you know, and in a lot of places you have to, you know, in a lot of situations you have to. So I think that's something that we have to look at holistically and somewhat long-term, is how do you take some of those bigger actions to reduce vehicle dependency that then will promote some of you know, and make these alternative modes more accessible.
And I would just add, or I see if anybody wants to offer an addition. One of the comments that we got is ties into what you just said, Jill. It's also about safety, right? The things you're describing also make travel safer for pedestrians and bicyclists and people driving.
And it's Jill's right. It's all about the trade-offs, though. Right? There's trade-offs for everything. Do you have less parking because you want to make biking and walking safer? So, but you have to build that case, and you have to bring people in to be part of the decision making, but also understand what those trade-offs are and support those trade-offs and say, okay, the benefits of doing this is better than what we have right now. So you have to bring people along and have them kind of like what Vancouver was doing by showing, well, this is how we're commuting. Why doesn't our roadway look like? So you just have to make sure that you've educated people to know what are those trade-offs and to support those trade-offs.
We've got just a couple of minutes left, and I want to ask any of our panelists if there's something that they wanted to share, didn't get a chance to. We've made it through most of the questions. I apologize to the few we didn't get to. There's some that are real specific that we're not able to touch on right now. But anybody on the panel have anything they wanted to add or leave as a parting thought?
One, not a big one, but one that I think came up, I'm not sure if we touched on yet, was the idea of rideshare and being, once you get across the boundary of another community. We had a local example of that where two of the major cities were not talking to each other and they couldn't get the licenses in place. So, you know, the scooters would get to the city boundary and then their GPS would tell them to shut off. So they've come together and they're now writing joint contracts with a lot of the ride share and the bike share kind of programs, so that they can get a larger range. And I do think, you know, in a community like Wilmette that has a lot of neighbors around it, you know, coming up with a joint group that would negotiate and allow these things to be done jointly. You can help each other. I think there's some economy of scale just setting up these programs, and then also you have that better experience from the rider that they can go further with the given thing. So I don't know how that works out for you all, but that might be one thing to work on. And the Tim that said that, yeah, we've already got a lot of the bike share here are motorized, and those are taking off. That's very popular. Motorized bikes have become very popular very quickly.
And,
You know,
and before we
set this.
Tim, can I just interrupt for 1 second? I want to get a quick one for Dan before he's got to head off. Dan, if people have questions about the plan or bike safety or crossing or things about the Edens and getting across, who at the village can they reach out to, or how can they be in touch?
They can reach out to me via email. My email can be found on the village website.
Great, thanks, Dan. Tim, you were saying?
I was just going to say our group, it's interesting. It's always bikers against cars and the conflict between them. And we brought a couple of kids in from New Trier who were doing a study on the bike lanes on Sheridan Road. And mostly they were studying it through the experiences their peers have had at New Trier as new drivers. And their results came out that these young drivers wanted bikes separated from the road as much as the bikers did, because they were afraid to go around bikes. They were uncomfortable being anywhere near bikes on the road. And it's not the way we usually think about this problem, that there are drivers out there that want to be as far away from you as you want to be from them. So these kids had a nice perspective on it.
One of the very first things I told my children when they started driving was, I say, you know, when you watch TV or you watch a movie and there's a person in a car chasing somebody who's running or on a bike, and it seems to take them forever to catch up to them. I said, it doesn't really work like that in the real world. So anybody else? We're gonna take a break in just a minute, but I want to thank our transportation group. And Dan, again, thanks for squeezing us in. I know you got other responsibilities tonight, but Jill, any other magic wands you want to share before we sign off?
No, I think we covered it all. I did like
Outstanding.
I did like the idea of the autonomous vehicle. I was like, can we somehow get that around High Crest and the Wilmette Junior High, like some way to get all the students there just magically without cars? I think everyone would like that.
There you go.
Just look for opportunities to pilot programs.
Yeah.
With that, we're gonna take a break, and we will switch over our panels, and we will thank Dan and Tim and Jill very, very much for their insights and their time. And we will switch over our panel, and everybody can go and refill your glass and take a bio break, and we'll be back at it's almost 7 o'clock now, so we'll be back at 7:02 precisely, or close to it. I don't know. Anyway, thank you all again very much.
Thank you. Good night.